Thank you. So really amazing when you see that map and you see the extent of the empire. This is, you have to realize, this is around 500 BCE. This is before the classical Greece. Keep that in mind. Classical Greece starts in 480, sorry, in 480, and only gonna last for 80 years. So here the Achaemenids are forming that big empire, and I'm bringing you a few images to show you to what point they were sophisticated. This is a view, this is north of Shiraz in Iran, and these are rock-carved tombs of Darius II, Artaxerxes II, Darius the Great, and Xerxes the First. You can see them dug in the rock, but there are also a lot of extraordinary bas-relief that are carved around it. And I want to show you some of it. This is above the tomb of Darius the Great, and you have all the beautiful writing, the cuneiform writing all around him, telling the whole story of Darius the Great. And you have...
And we can't see the slide.
So sorry, no, my fault. I pushed on it, but it didn't. There we are. There. And so you see the quality of the carving, and even more of a carving that is below it. And look here, the triumph of Shapur over the Roman Emperor Valerian. Look at how beautiful it's rendered, the horse and everything. It's very sophisticated. This is before the Parthenon was built. So again, I want to put that in perspective. And this is something they had learned by themselves. They had also built some large cities, and this is Persepolis, which is south of there. And I can show it because that... my disclaimer, I didn't go on the Silk Road, but I was in Persepolis 50 and some years ago. So Persepolis is quite remarkable too. It was a palace and it had temples. It was a very beautiful place. And this is the Gate of the Nations by which you were entering the palace with the lamassu on the front. It was restored for the coronation of Faradiba when the Shah was still there. I will join to the presentation. I will send you, there are 2 sites where they reconstruct Persepolis, and it's absolutely wonderful. Now imagine all this was colored. We always look at a beautiful stone. No, this was blue and green and red and yellow. It had very vibrant colors on it. Here's the staircase that goes up to the palace. Just to show you the sophistication of that empire that actually is the one that came and took over Babylon and liberated the Jews from Babylon and let them go back home. But they were overrun by Alexander. And here's a map showing with the red, you can see all the trek that Alexander and his troops did in the Middle East. Alexander was not interested by Europe. We were barbarian at that time. So he was interested in the East because he knew of the quality of the life of the Achaemenid among them. And so he's going to go with very convoluted road from 330 until he's dead in 323. He's going to do that whole trek and go all the way to the border of India. And there the soldiers are going to revolt and say, we want to go home. We are tired. We want to see our family. And so he had to turn around. And by the time he came back to Babylon, he was struck by a quick disease and he died there. His empire was taken over by his generals and split between certain generals. And this is where we have the Seleucid Empire. So Seleucus, one of his generals, took that whole chunk of the empire of Alexander the Great. Ptolemy took Egypt and part of North Africa. And then you have different smaller generals that take Macedonia and Greece and what is Turkey now. And then come the Romans. And so here I'm bringing you that map that you've already seen before, but I love it because it shows you the growth of the empire. And you have the date and what's happening on top. So Roman Republic after the victory in the Second Punic War. Roman Republic during the Mithridatic Wars. Roman Republic, and you have Caesar provinces and Pompey, and so on. And then after the death of Caesar, we have the empire, and this is empire growing. And I think what we have to see is look at the Achaemenid Empire. We have Alexander the Great. We now have the Romans. And look at, okay, it's going to last from the beginning of it. It's going to last about not even a millennium for Rome. And then it comes back to one country. So, okay, I'm going to go on. During that time, we have to now go to the other side of the world and go and look at China, because China had to build up an empire too before we can even think of the Silk Road. So moving to China, you have the Han Empire. The Han Empire that lasts between 206 BCE and 220 of our era, common era. And to come to the idea even of connection with the West, you have to be able to go through the natural borders. And the natural borders are desert and mountains and water, of course. But water you can go through, and even the Romans came in 100 and some to all the way to China. But what they needed to make it a successful track is they needed this passage that we're going to talk about, which is called the Hexi Corridor or Gansu Corridor. And the problem was it was occupied by nomadic tribes that were attacking any caravan that wanted to go through there. And so they had to conquer these tribes before they could start thinking of going through it and having a contact with the West. And so this is what you can see. All these red arrows is their different campaigns. Yes.
About how large were the tribes?
Very large. I mean,
Like 1,000?
oh no, more, because they were spread. So you had different tribes under the same ethnic group, but that were attacking and that were very powerful. So the Han at first tried to have compromise, and they would meet them once a year and give them gifts so that they wouldn't attack. But it happened anyway. And so this is the problem. They really had a big problem. Until they submitted these tribes, they couldn't use that corridor that you see in red and white, the Hexi corridor that we're going to see in a minute. And here's a larger view of that. And that corridor was made of little towns that were oasis towns. We're now talking about desert. This is in between two deserts. You have the Taklamakan Desert, and we have the Gobi Desert there. And just below the Taklamakan is there. And here we have the Himalayas. So no way of going through. They had to find a way just at the edge of it, above or under, to be able to go through. Once they submit these tribes, they now have control for the caravans to go through, but they send some surveyors to the other side. And they come back with history. We met some really sophisticated people. And these were the Seleucid and the successors of the Seleucid that were making the Persian Empire at the time. And so because you had these important and sophisticated empires on the other side, they could bring goods that would interest them, like silk and so on, that people would appreciate. If you had only barbarian on the other side, they wouldn't give whatever for these beautiful goods. So coming back, this is a map showing the Silk Roads around 100 BC. And so you can see it starts more than Luoyang, it starts in Chang'an. This was at the time when Chang'an went down, Luoyang was, but those were the capitals for the towns at different times. And so they went through that Exi passage, and then they had to go under or above the Taklamakan Desert. And all these, as I say, were oasis towns. Then they would be at Kashgar and come back and go through what was then the Kushan Empire, that, by the way, were other tribes, the nomadic tribes that had been pushed by the one on the north and had formed this empire here. And then they would come to the Persian Empire. So you need all these conditions to be filled to be able to go through it. So a few hundred years later, in 600, here's the state of Europe and the Middle East, where the Western Roman Empire has all but disappeared. And we have the Byzantine Empire, which is very powerful, the Persian Empire with the Sassanid that have succeeded to the Persian, and then you have as you see, the Eastern Roman Empire that goes all the north of Africa too. But something really important is going to happen then. In the early 600s, we have the upcoming of Islam, and we'll see how this is going to change a lot of things too. So before we reach that period, we have to look at the historical significance of the Silk Road. And it's not only a commercial corridor, if you want, but it also connects different civilizations. It fosters cultural exchange and influences the development of society along its road, because many of the cities are going to grow with the passage of all these caravans. They're going to become a hub themselves and often connect to other cities north or south. Sorry, it's... Sorry, but pushed, the computer is really... So we talk about trade and exchange. The facilitate trade with silk being the highly sought after commodity from the East, and other goods like spices, tea, porcelain, horses, precious metals, and slaves. The route and geography spanned across Asia, reaching as far east as Korea and Japan. So you have secondary routes that are going to go there. We start in Chang'an with really the big starting point. And as far west as Italy and Turkey. They included both land routes through Central Asia and sea routes across the Indian Ocean and Mediterranean. And you can see them there. And that's only going to increase. The more they have political problem on the road, the more the maritime routes are going to expand. Yes?
What did the Chinese take in exchange for?
Okay, we'll see that in a minute.
Oh,
We're going to go through all this. I was just giving in general. So the duration for the land Silk Road is about from the 2nd century before our era to the mid-15th century of our era. And the cultural impact was also a conduit for the transmission of religion, philosophies and artistic styles, but also for diseases like Black Death. So you can see the complexity of these contacts that existed there. So let's go a little bit through some of the main items that they were exchanging. Silk, because it gave the name to the Silk Road, though some people contest the fact that jade was very prominent too, but for the easiness of the discussion, we'll call it Silk Road. So silk that believed to have originated in ancient China around 3630 BCE, donc before our era. And what is interesting is that taking the silk with them was also used as money, if you want, because they would come to nomadic tribes that couldn't care less about coins. They couldn't do anything with coins. But giving them bolts of silk was very interesting to them. So that became like money too. And so it was not only a luxury product, but also a currency. Jade considered more valuable than gold and silver in China, especially white jade from Khotan. And jade was associated with longevity, wisdom, and purity. And so this was also some stones and objects made of jade that were part of the trade. And here is a map that gives you an idea where the main points where you could find the jade deposits in the world. Porcelain. Eastern Han Dynasty, early glazed ceramics wares had developed into porcelain, and around 600 of our era, porcelain, they obtained that very white and translucent porcelain. So they really improved on the technology. And so it became so precious, not only for the Chinese, but all the Middle East craved for porcelain to come through. On the other hand, the Chinese wanted glass, and it was made by the Romans. The Romans that relied on the Hellenistic techniques, but they developed the industry of glass making. And so that was for the Chinese something very precious that they brought in. So you have in the 1st century of our era, it should be CE, the industry underwent rapid technical growth that saw the introduction of glass blowing. And where they had up to then color glass, they started having purely transparent glass, which was very much appreciated at the time. Now, for all of you that like cooking, spices. Spices, of course, was very important. And the people were, even, of course, once the maritime route took over, that was the great idea, was to find the spices. And you have black pepper, cloves, saffron, cardamom, ginger, nutmeg, cinnamon, and so on. Tea was also quite...
Yeah.
Yes.
Coming from China or from?
No, coming from China. And sometimes from other countries that were connected to China and that were brought to Chang'an and then exported to the West. And the tea appears very early in 2737. And the legend says that it's the Emperor Shennong that you see there, who one day had a leaf of tea falling into his water, and he drank it and he liked it. But that's a legend, of course. Tea was first used as a medication, and then they made it all the way to the point of using it as a drink, just as a sophisticated drink at the time. And very quickly, it became quite fashionable, not only in China, but in the Middle East. As you know, there's still tea drinkers over there. Really interesting too is horses. And the horses were coming from what is now Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan. This is where the first horses were domesticated. And they developed some breeds of horses that were known as fire horse. They were so extraordinary. And so the Chinese were very, very appreciative of the quality of these horses and wanted it not only for the army, but for all the aristocracy and the noble people wanted these very fiery horses that had tremendous character. Furs also coming from that area of Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan. The trappers coming from the north, what is now Russia or Kazakhstan, would go and trap different animals like the foxes, the sables, mink, beaver, and ermine. And these furs were appreciated both sides. They were appreciated in China as well as in Europe and the Middle East. And then slaves, and we have to recognize, and that's most of it is going to be around the Bukhara, which is going to be renowned as a slave market. Bukhara, they would go in the steppes north and just go and raid some tribes, and particularly young women were the prey, the favorite prey, and they would bring in these slaves and send them to mostly to the east, but also to the west. Now, there is not only objects, but also technology. And we're quite aware how inventive and creative the Chinese were. So mostly we inherit from them. And the technology, the first technology that we see here is the compass. And it's quite interesting because at first they were using what is a lodestone. If you don't know what a lodestone is, it's a magnetized stone that is found rarely, but you can find it. And through that, with different pieces of iron, they would be able to locate where the south was. And so this was the beginning of the compass. And then they started with a needle, and by 1088, they had the first suspended magnetic needle compass. I'm going to show you an early compass with a spoon, and that spoon was magnetized too. And so this was a model of during the Han Dynasty. So the Han Dynasty finished around 260 of our era. And the south indicating ladle of Sinan made of magnetized lodestones. So that was one of the first things. Paper making. The Chinese are the first that made paper. In Europe, as you know, we first used papyrus coming from Egypt, but once in Alexandria, there was so much demand for papyrus that they ran out of it. And so they started making parchment. But parchment went on quite a long time, all the way to about the coincidence with the printing in Europe. And so you have these until the 10th and 12th century, you have parchment, but no paper. And it's only actually with some prisoners, Chinese prisoners, that because all these were secrets, the Chinese didn't want to give up. And it's two prisoners, Chinese prisoners, who had been working in the paper industry, who were able to tell their conqueror about the secrets of paper making. And that very quickly spread to the Middle East and then to Italy and Spain. It's the two ways that Spain happened. So look, in the 6th century, sheets of paper were beginning to be used for toilet paper as well in the East. Gunpowder was invented in China too, but at first it was used as an elixir. It was supposed to bring you a longer life. How wrong they were. So they had a lot of problems with it because the way they were making it, they had lots of accidents. But then they realized they could use it for fireworks. So that was peaceful at first. And then again, the secret passed on to the West, and this became a very deadly weapon. And then finally, printing. Printing was also invented in China, but we talk about woodblock printing with the Chinese alphabet the movable modules print is not practical. You have too many different words and different characters. And so for them, engraving it in a block of wood was more practical, but this is what they did. And you have there one of the first example of printing in the East. But you have also cultural impact. Artistic styles, fashion even. It's known that at the time, for example, in China, at the court, they were dressing like Turks. They thought it was much nicer, and they had leopard skins and all kind of things, and dressed totally different. They had Turkish hats instead of Chinese hats and so on. But probably the biggest cultural impact is religious. And so we face this as the main religion that existed at that time. From 3000 BCE, you had Hinduism, the Greek religion, of course, that's an accumulation of new gods with the conquest, with pantheon of gods. But then you have Judaism, it starts around 2000 BCE. Zoroastrianism is a typically Persian religion that goes back 1000 BCE and has almost disappeared, but was very much intimately linked with the Persian identity. And that's how it's going to survive for a while. Then Buddhism that starts around 500 BCE, and of course Christianity, the first century of our era, and then in 610 we have Islam. I'm afraid that I have brought you a beautiful map, but it's not going to work. But I will send it to you, and it shows you the beginning of all these religions and how they spread and then shrunk and spread again. And then what is the most spectacular is how Islam spread it very fast and very large. So I'm going to try, but I don't think it's going to work. It works on my computer, but it doesn't transpire. No. So I had to do it another way. I apologize for it. So anyway, I will send all that to you so you can look at it by yourself. And this is just an image I thought was funny. Is a Buddhist monk traveling. And Buddhist monks were traveled quite a long way. And you can see he has a backpack with all kind of scrolls, all kind of writings. As far as art was concerned, we can see how things are influencing one another. You have on the left that Kanishka casket that contain apparently some remnants of Buddha, but shows 3 gods on the casket, including what they believe is Christ, but with the halo. And so you can see the halo is something quite universal. You find it with Buddhism, you find it in Christianity with the Masaccio, there you can see the tribute money, and you find it in Islam with Mohammed leading Abraham, Moses, Jesus, and others in prayer. It's a different kind of halo, but it's that idea. So now we're going to go through the voyage, and I bring you here another map, but it gives you again an idea. And everything starts, we're going to go from east to west. So we're going to start with Chang'an, which is nowadays Xi'an. That was the capital of the Han Empire and the Tang Empire. So Chang'an, now Xi'an, is one of China's 4 great ancient capitals. And it was including the Western Zhou, Qin, Western Han, Sui, Northern Zhou, and Tang. It was the terminal point of the Silk Road. It is, by the way, and I'm not going to insist on it, it is where you have the famous terracotta army, and the mausoleum of Qin is in the south neighborhood of Xi'an. But it's prior to our era, so I'm just going to show it, but I'm not going to explain anything. This is another story. Xi'an, here is the way that it was during the Tang Dynasty, so in the 7th century to the 9th century. This is about the way the city was organized. As you see, very, very organized. It actually had contained up to 1 million inhabitants, which is enormous for the time. It was one of the largest cities in the world. But you can see on the top, you had the different palaces, you had temples and pagodas, but everything was organized. You had that many people living in every little square that you see there. It was quite well administered. Here is a picture of the restored Daming Palace. It was the Tang Royal Palace or Imperial Palace. And here's a way that it was organized. This is a reconstruction in miniature of the way the palace was working with the houses around it. And pagodas, this is the largest one, the giant wild goose pagoda built in 652. But in Chang'an, you had a diversity of religion. So the idea that the immigrants brought the ideas of new religion into the capital. Evidence suggests at least 5 or 6 Zoroastrian temples existed inside the city, while 4 temples existed around the Western market. Christianity was around as well. Brought by a Persian, because Christianity was in Persia for a while, and mostly the Church of the East, so it had already split with the central church. At the time of the Tang Dynasty, they placed a ban on most of the religion that were there, even Buddhism. And only a generation later, then they suppressed the ban on Buddhism, and Buddhism went on. And as I mentioned, in the south of Xi'an, you have the famous terracotta army, but apparently there are other pits, by the way, with jesters and dancers and so on that were supposed to entertain Qin in his mausoleum. As you know, the mausoleum that you see up there on the right has never been opened because of different reasons. One is that it probably is strict, that they have some traps that could really make the whole thing collapse or whatever to prevent looting. But also they want to make sure that they have the utmost new technology, so that when they go into it, they're really going to do as little harm as possible to that mausoleum. And from Chang'an, so we go northwest, and we come to what is called the Shansu Hexi Corridor. And as you can see, you have desert on both sides at that place. And so only some oasis towns in between. These have changed, as we will see in a minute, but at first they were very small, like trading posts. You can really think about it as we have up north here. What you find is that spreading of Buddhism is incredible. And so in many places, as you find in Tianshui, you have these grottos built by Buddhist monks in the mountain. And in this case, these 194 rock-cut caves contain over 7,200 Buddhist sculptures and 1,000 square meters of murals. So incredible. All these little holes that you see all around the mountains were caves where the monks would go and meditate away from the crowd. And just give you 2 examples here. These would be, you have that dark phase is oxidation of the pigment that they were using to paint it, oxidized with the weather. But then you have some of these that are now closed and supported by trees. When we go on, we come to the first large city, which by now is huge, and it is Lanzhou. And as you can see, it's incredible when you think it started as a little oasis town. It is now I think let's say the fourth largest city in the north of China. Most of the temples and so on have been destroyed, but you can see one, the White Pagoda, has remained, and it's on a hill on the side of the town. It is the capital and largest city of the Gansu province. It is a center for heavy industry and petrochemical industry. Wuwei is the same. It was in the first millennium, it was a major link on the Northern Silk Road. But now look at the size of that city with all large building and a very prosperous city. It's actually with an elevation of 3,350 feet to 15,000 feet high. This is all cold desert. So we think desert and heat, it is not the case there. The average temperature is 44 Fahrenheit. So you go very cold, and maybe maximum you go to 70 for a day or two during the year, but otherwise it's really cold. It's the cold desert climate. It also has Buddhist and Confucian temples and grottos, but I'm going to show you different ones, and so I thought it was not necessary to go into the Wuwei, which are not as spectacular. In Shangye, also part of the Gansu corridor, we have that Dafo temple that was restored in 2005. That is really known for that gigantic Buddha, reclined Buddha, that was made around 1100 during the Western Xia period. He's represented as the Gautama Buddha's attainment of nirvana with 10 disciples standing behind him. He is largely unaltered since that time he was made. He has a length of 115 feet. And it is considered the largest reclining clay Buddha statue in China. It's actually a wooden core with clay on top. When you go further, you are really in the desert, as you can see. But to protect the cities that we just saw, they had extended the Great Wall of China all the way to there. So what you see here is one of the towers that was the guard of these walls in Dunhuang. And here are the remnants of the wall, the Great Wall in that place, which had not been kept in good condition. But Dunhuang has some wonderful Buddhist monuments, including that White Horse Pagoda that was built from 581 and also in 618 under the Tang. Dunhuang was the intersection of three main Silk Roads, the north, the central, and the south. But what is also spectacular are the Mogao caves that are in Dunhuang. And again there, we have that cave that is considered the 1,000 Buddha grottos. Each cave, and I don't see that I have, but it's about 150 caves. Each one has Buddhas and frescoes also. Just giving you an idea. And they were built during 300-year period. So you have different influences. You're going to have Western influences, Indian influences, and then purely Central China influences. Another reclined Buddha, which is only 45 feet long. And then fantastic frescoes. And again, these are oxidized because of the pigment they have used to paint them has finally turned gray and black because of the oxidation. But this one in parentheses shows a lot of Indian influence in the making. What is also very interesting in the Mogao cave is they found some about 50,000 ancient documents that were discovered in rooms like the one you see on the right. Documents that were coming from not only China, but they also even had a Hebrew penitential prayer book in Hebrew, and but other pieces coming from Persia and so on. In the 19th century, the priests that wanted to do some repair and maintenance of all these grottos were in contact with some European that came. One was British and Hungarian guy that didn't know Chinese but was interested in all things. But the other one was Paul Pelliot, who was a Frenchman and who was a sinologue, very, very special. He spoke 15 languages. And when I talk about language, he talks, Chinese, the different dialects, Turkish, Arabic, and so on. He was an incredible, he had a memory that was unbelievable. And he knew what he had there. And the monks sold each of them a whole quantity of these documents that they brought back to Europe. And so one part from Stein, Oral Stein, who was that Hungarian and British guy, are in the British National Library. The others are in the French National Library in Paris. Yes, John?
And this cave is still used by Buddhist monks, or they're just restored?
You are in China, and the religion is not quite well looked at in China. So yes, I'm sure some people go, but monks, they are no more normally. So these are, it has become more of a museum than anything else. But anyway, so this is really interesting because they are now, because China wants all these documents back, saying they were looted, and no, they were sold. They were sold for a pretty hefty sum, by the way. And but they're now scanning all these documents, and they are going to send them back, or send the scanning back. And here's a Han Dynasty granary just west of Dunhuang. You can see what is left of it. And then, if you remember, we're talking about jade. This is now going the southern route under the Taklamakan Desert. And this is part of where they found the jade. You remember that it was in Khotan that they could find the jade. This is collecting jade in the White Jade River near Khotan. And so you have all these people, all the white that you see there are pieces of white jade. Yeah, and so they go and they get the best, the purest, and so on. And so this is incredible. This is nephrite jade, so it's a good one. And other example, this is now, we go back the northern route because there's very little in the southern route except what I just showed you. But in the northern route, you have ancient cities that have been emptied and not maintained. So here's the Gaochang, now called Turpan. And some of the kind of caravan that you would have seen during the Silk Road, the heydays of Silk Road, where you had thousands, literally, of dromedaries or camels just going along, because it was the only safe way to travel was together. And people would join, the monks and the other people would join because it was safe. So you didn't have only commerce, but you had people. So before we go to, no, we're going to do one more. Yining is another of the cities. As you can see, really interesting, you have the mosque and the pagoda side by side. to show you how you had so many influences of different religion. And then finally, the point where the southern route and the northern route fuse is Kashgar, which is still a small and underdeveloped city. So before we go on, then we're now getting out of China, and we are going to move to the southern part of the Tajikistan, and then we're going to go to Uzbekistan and come down Turkmenistan. I propose that we're going to put some light and you have some coffee. You can ask a few questions. Wow. Wow. You look at another way.
Yes, it's
What you're going to see now, because you now come into cases that were highly sophisticated and didn't have to go to the revolution.
You have to do this lecture, yeah.
Oh, yes, I am. That's what. Go ahead, look at the map. Go ahead, look at the map. That's right. This is a mark. Oh, I love maps. Yeah, but look at it.
So my,
Tell me.
somehow, I never knew about this lecture series. And we have, this is over now.
Yes, I have the new one, so if you give me your address, if I don't have it. But I'm gonna send I have already sent the schedule, but I'm gonna send it again. And the new program, I think because I know they put it online. If you give me if you have a pen, here, please put it here.
You want email, not text.
No, email. Email, no, because these are not easy to bring in with text.
I am so sorry,
No, it was a great program because the upcoming program is
better, I just,
No, I wouldn't say
I
better.
saw the artist, it's mildly interesting to me, but
No, but
the other lectures, I would have gone to every one of them.
Yeah,
But
but now
now,
artists, I can tell you, you have to look at the movies. Yeah, I've never heard of that. Trust me.
so I should go to the.
Oh, yes.
All right, okay, so let me write this down.
That's a fabulous. Okay, so.
Having an overview is interesting too.
You can look at that afterwards.
Maybe the, they weren't allowed to own land. I wonder if they were allowed to own land. Maybe
Okay, we go on. One thing also that I didn't mention is people would typically, the same people would not do the whole trek. They would have hubs and change their, just like changing the horses, they would bring the merchandise and that was taken by another group and taken to the next big hub. And again, so the merchandise might change hands 4 times to reach Chang'an. from Europe. You will see that on the list of the little flyer that you have, there are some discrepancy, or not discrepancy, but I've added things on my presentation that is not on it because I've worked on it to the last minute. And I find things to the last minute, which is incredible. And this is one of them. And this is in Tajikistan. And it's a former palace. What you see there is a former palace. Doesn't look like much seen from there, but they found some incredible frescoes in it. Look at that are now in St. Petersburg, Russia, because it used to be Russian territory. But this mural, unfortunately, probably the place being very tiny, nobody would have gone there. So there are a few that are in the capital of Tajikistan, but the main ones, this one that shows fictitious King Rostam with all a scene of battle and jousting and so on, is absolutely unbelievable. And I found that just by pure accident, because there is no comprehensive site, if you want, on these. So I had to find many things bit by bit. And so here you have a site with festivities, and you can see they are on horseback. They're absolutely gorgeous. And here's another of these showing figures with halos, and they probably showing the worship of Christian, Buddhist, and Zoroastrian, Iranian, and Hindu deities, all grouped together. And what it shows you is that it kind of fusion of the religion at that time, where they hear about the religion and they're interested by some aspect and they're interested by other aspect, and they put them all together. They should get along after all, if they got, right? So look at that. It's absolutely incredible, and found in that demolished palace. We have to realize there were a lot of different powers that came there. And so you have nascent civilization, and then it's overrun by another one. And sometimes they raised the place. And so there's nothing left, and we'll see many of it. Now I'm coming to one of the high points of the route, and I'm talking about Samarkand. And Samarkand is incredible. You see here the city behind, but the ruins of Afrasiab, which was the ancient Samarkand, at the front. It's one of the oldest cities in Central Asia, as well as oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world. Alexander conquered Samarkand in 329. It was at that time known as Mahakanda by the Greeks. And what we have to understand with Alexander, think how young he was. You know, he started going out and conquering at the age of 17. And he died at age 33. So it's incredible to think that kind of energy and that desire of spreading the culture. Because in great part, he wanted to bring to the world that culture from the Greeks. And that had turned, he was Macedonian, of course, but he had been tutored by Aristotle. And Aristotle had ingrained in his brain the greatness of the Greek philosophers and writers and so on. So this had marked, that whole area there is really marked. The first statues of Buddha that you see look like Greek statues with draperies and so on. Buddha, at the beginning of Buddhism, the only thing you see with Buddha are footprints. These were the only way you could see a representation of Buddha, was with the footprint. Once they came in contact with the statues that Alexander and others had brought in, and they saw these marvelous things, they saw that people were attracted by statues. And they decided, okay, we maybe have to change our view on representing Buddha. And the first statues of Buddha come out. And that's under the influence of Alexander.
This is fascinating.
Yeah. And so the very first statues of Buddha that you see have these very convoluted draperies you see on Greek statues. So that is really incredible. But the person who had the biggest influence on Samarkand is Timur. Timur, also known as Tamerlane, was a Turco-Mongol conqueror who founded the Timurid Empire in around what is now Afghanistan, Iran, and Central Asia, and started the Timurid dynasty. He was extremely cruel, but adored art, which is an interesting, let's say, how can I say, different, a contradiction almost. And what he did, and that's where his empire didn't stay, is the fact that he didn't install, like the Romans, a governor, or like the Persian did with satraps, didn't have people that of the main cities that he conquered organize the world the way he wanted to see it. So all he would do is go loot and go on to the next one. And so that was a problem because 2 generations after him, his empire fell apart. But in the meantime, he had a tremendous influence on Samarkand. And hold your breath. This is just the mausoleum of Timur and his sons. And that very simple monument has been of great influence on many buildings, including the Taj Mahal, was really built after taking the pattern here. Also the tomb of Humayun in Delhi, and literally the mosque in St. Petersburg is also portrayed after the mausoleum to the Gur-e-Amir, which is the tomb of Timur. But there are a whole series of different mosques and madrasas that are school, in fact, or universities. But here I'm showing a few. This is a memorial complex with the tombs behind. You can see there's a whole court with different tombs.
Pretty round.
The mosque here, the Friday Mosque. And by the way, Marco Polo went through Samarkand and thought it was a very large and splendid city in his. But what, as he said, it was really interesting. When he was fighting and overrunning cities, he would kill an enormous amount of people, except the craftsmen and the artists, because he wanted them to come and embellish his city. So you better be an artist at that time. And then the main square in Samarkand is this one, the Registan. And the Registan is surrounded by 3 great madrasa, so 3 big schools. And you have what you see, this big entrance there is called an Iwan. So.
It's very Iranian.
Pardon?
It looks very Iranian.
Yes, but because don't forget, it was all, you have the whole influence. This is a little bit before the Abbasid and the main mosque in Isfahan that we'll see in a minute. But they were inspired by that.
Yeah.
So let's say the Iranian look like Timur's.
Yes.
So you have the Ulugh Beg Madrasa, the Tilia Kohi Madrasa, and the Sherdor Madrasa. Here's the Ulugh Beg Madrasa, built between 1417, is the oldest of the 3. It was the grandson, built by the grandson of Timur, who was a prominent astronomer. So remember that, because we'd see something in a minute that's quite interesting. Before the city was occupied by others, this was also full, that square was full with caravanserai and shops and all kind of things. But this is the place where you gather in Samarkand. This is the interior of the madrasa that you just see.
Those all mosaics.
Pardon?
Are those all mosaics?
Yes. This is the Tilia Kari Madrasa. And here I really have to say that the colors have all a meaning. And for example, the shades of blue in the Goramir that we saw at first, which is the mausoleum to Timur, is the colors of mourning. In that era, blue is the color of mourning in Central Asia. But it's also warding off evil. But also, blue represented water, which was a particularly rare resource in this region. And walls painted blue symbolized the wealth of the city. The other most important color was gold, that has a strong presence. And of course, Timur was fascinated with vaulting, and we'll see some that are incredible. So here you can see a little bit the beauty of these mosaics. And then the inside of the madrasa. So each are different classes where they would hold the class. And it's still in use. And look at the inside. So talk about blue and gold and then finally the third one, the Sherdor Madrasa, with interesting figures there. You have tiger-like figures with a head in the middle of the back and spines on top of it, which is really... I couldn't find anything. There must be, but these, unless I had a book, specific on Samarkand and this, it's interesting, but it has to be... don't forget that normally in Islam, you don't show humans nor animals. But in Persia, you do. In Persia is an exception, and you find, I have a whole book of Persian miniatures when Persia was already Muslim. So they're not as drastic as the rest of the world. And then finally, and this was built by the grandson of Timur, is the observatory. So Samarkand became a really center of science, and particularly astronomy. What you have on the right is a mural sextant that is has a radius of 40 meters, 120 feet. And that was a way to locate the stars and to see their movement. So normally a sextant is a little instrument that you hold in your hand. This was magnified to that size to have a better view. So that area they would gather all these scientists, mathematicians, astronomers, doctors, medicine, so physicians. Medicine at that time in these areas were much more advanced than anywhere in Europe. So for a while, Samarkand lost its primacy to a city that is a little west and north of it. It's Bukhara. Bukhara became also a center of learning and renowned throughout Persian and Islamic world, particularly for the mystical Sufis. The minaret that you see there is the highest monument in Bukhara, was used to execute criminals by being thrown off the top. Gentle death. But they also have an incredible fortress. And look at this. This is the entrance of that ark fortress. Look at the walls. Let me see. Let me see. 2 seconds. It was built in the 5th century of our era. And then, of course, solidified, just maintained. But it was a huge, so this was a huge fortress, and then inside you had a whole series of buildings, of which most of them have been destroyed, except the one that you see in dark black are shown there that still exist. But so it was like a city in a fortress, if you want. And then here is again the minaret with two madrasas. And the interior, and this is the interior of the mosque. Here is the madrasa, sorry. This is the Labi house, survived because of, it was such a beautiful ensemble. It was saved from when they came and raised. Look at this, these just beautiful peacock. Always a symbol of eternity. Moving from there, we come in, that's where I say we have that succession of incredible places like Samarkand, but then we come sometimes to these places that have been completely destroyed. And this is the case of Merv, which was known as the Merv Oasis in the northern part of Iran at that time. It was a center of the satrapy during the Achaemenid Empire already. And in the 11th and 12th century, it was the capital of the Seljuk Empire, which was a big empire at the time, which is going to give away to the Ottomans. It was a chief center of Islamic science and culture, attracting, producing, renowned poets, musicians, physicians, mathematicians, and astronomers. Even Omar Khayyam went there. And we'll see Omar Khayyam. So this is all there is left of Merv, because in 1788, the Shah Murad raised the city to the ground, broke down the dams that was bringing the water, which was leaving the land as a wasteland. That's all was left. And the entire population of the city and the surrounding oasis of about 100,000 were then deported to the Bukharan oasis in Samarkand. This is the former palace of Merv that also had a city inside, if you want, that used to look like this. So you see that it's, to me, when I was preparing this, is you have that constant building and demolition. And sometimes things survive, but you have a lot that have been so successful they don't even exist anymore. I'm doing a little detour, though. It was a detour made by the Silk Road to the Bamiyan Valley in what is now North Afghanistan. It was on the Silk Road, and it just shows the expansion of Buddhism. This is the famous valley where you have the three Buddhas there. It were, though they are trying to reconstruct, but with Taliban having taken over, probably not. But the Buddha on the left used to look like this, probably. Huge Buddha that is over 50 meter high, so 150 feet high. It was this way when it happened, and unfortunately, as you know, in 2001, Mullah Omar ordered the force to demolish the Bamiyan Buddhas, not so much directed against Buddhism, but more against the Western world that was giving so much money to maintain these when people were dying of hunger. So they picked up the pieces and are trying to restore them, but I don't know what the status is since the Taliban are back. The next city is Nishapur. It's a small city. But I wanted to show you because all along, you wonder where these people were sleeping. And what happens is that they were sleeping in what is called Caravanserai. And Caravanserai is an inn, literally. This is where they would stop. They had a place for their dromedaries and for their animals, and they had each their rooms. And this is something that has remained, but mostly in the western part of the Silk Road. I couldn't find any really on the Chinese side. So they must have had something similar that was destroyed. But this is the entrance to that Caravansérail. And then inside, you had that large court with all the rooms around, and you had special places for the animals. But I'm also talking about Nishapur because it was the birthplace and the place where he died of Omar Khayyam. And I don't know who of you is aware of Omar Khayyam, who was a poet, Persian poet, polymath, known for his contribution to mathematics, astronomy, philosophy, and Persian literature. And I have brought one of my versions of Omar Khayyam there that, of course, has been very much appreciated in the English language since the translation by, what's his name? I had it disappeared anyway. A great translation, but he is a fabulous poet. He was a rebel. Sorry, he loved women and loved wine. And in the Islamic world, it was not so much appreciated. But he was such an incredible mind that he remained a very notable person. What is interesting, this is a modern monument made by a Persian architect, but with respect to what he was. And so you have a dome that relates to his work as an astronomer, but also as a poet. Many of his texts are engraved in the column all around. Now we are in Iran. We're going south. I'm moving a little bit out of the way of the main road, but this is with respect with what happened is you had the main road and you had this subsidiary road that would come down and go up and bring things from the hubs down to these other places. And this is, it's not that small a place. There are 600,000 inhabitants there. But Yazd is an interesting place because it benefits from the same climate as we do. It's very hot. And what you see there, you see all these towers, what they call wind towers, were built with the idea of cooling down the house. So you had an opening, and with these towers that were like chimneys, and the wind blowing there would pull out the warm air from the top of the room and would refresh the room, and still does. So they had all these technology, natural technology, if you want to help survive our climate. Not the only thing, they also had channels of water called kanats that were underground and were carrying the water underground so it would remain cool. And the technology was such. So you had the mother well, and then that water would go like this, and then would finish with irrigated land, so for agriculture. But you could go into the well and get that water that was cool. That same technology spread from there, from Persia, to all these places around, but is originally from Persia. In Yazd, there is also the remnant of a monument that was typically Zoroastrian, which is called the Tower of Silence. It is no longer in use, I can reassure you. But a dakma, which is also a Tower of Silence, is a circular raised sculpture built by the Zoroastrians for excarnation, which means the exposure of human corpses to the elements for decomposition. And so what they would do in the center of that tower, they would have a circular place where they would put dead bodies, and the vultures would come down and clean up the bodies, as they do in Tibet on the mountain, but here they had towers to do it. And so this would avoid any contamination of sick people or whatever. There is also an old caravanserai in the Zainuddin caravanserai, which you see that very nice inner court. And now we come still southwest, and we arrive in Isfahan. And there I was, 50 and some years ago, but and it's an extraordinary city. So this is the view of the center of Isfahan, the famous, the Naqsh Jan Square. With in the foreground, the superb mosque that we will see in a minute, that used to be called the Shah Abbas Mosque, but with Khomeini now it's called either the Shah Mosque or the Khomeini Mosque. But the very large square, which is one of the largest square in the world, and with that very rectangular shape, because they were playing polo. Polo originates from Iran also. And so they were playing polo on that place, and that's why you have that shape, that rectangular shape. That mosque is one of the most beautiful that you can see, probably compared to Istanbul. But here you see, and you have the Iwan at the front, because the mosque has to be oriented towards Mecca. And the orientation of the square was different. So you have an Iwan, and that turns in the middle towards the mosque. So the mosque is facing Mecca, but the orientation of the square is different. It was built under the Safavid Empire, completed in 1630 under the orders of Abbas the Great. The portal is around 90 feet high. And instead of the minarets, you know, the muezzin wouldn't go in the minarets there, they would go into this. That is on top of another Iwan. And so that's where they would do the call for prayer. And this is the entrance into that, so that Iwan. And you can see how it turns towards the mosque. It's filled with mukarnas, what you see at the end, as if you have been to Granada, you can see them. This is the door for the mosque with the mukarnas again, you know, these special decorations that you can hear are called mukarnas.
Wait, what city is this in?
Pardon?
What city?
Isfahan.
Isfahan. And here's the main hall in the mosque. The dome is 171 feet high and a diameter of 82 feet. Now I have to go with something personal. I was there. I was. I'm laughing when I think about it, because if I couldn't do it nowadays, but at that time it was still under the Shah, so we found somebody who let us in, and we climbed it, and we were there. And I found a little piece of the roof on the ground, and I picked it up, kept it for years. I have no idea where it went. It was a beautiful turquoise, but so I was there. Along, yeah.
No, I see this beautiful intricate work. Can you talk a little bit about the Isfahan rugs, because they're some of the very best.
Of the
Carpets.
oh, the carpets. Oh my gosh, that's another talk. Because we went. No, I'm telling you why. Is that I know something about carpet because I bought many when I was there, and I actually brought back one from not Isfahan but from Tehran on my arm under my coat so that the custom wouldn't see it. And I tell you, it was heavy. So anyway, and I still have it. It's in my office. The Isfahan is known for very fine thing, beautiful design. But Bukhara is also another place where they had these extraordinary carpet mostly red with a reproduced design. So each of these regions have their own design. I visited one of the places where they were making the carpets there. They were still kids making that because they had such fine fingers. They were the only one to make knots small enough with a very fine carpet. But it's I think actually I know a guy who owns a carpet shop here, and he would be wonderful at discussing, though he wouldn't have the courage to stand in front of you. But it's such a specialty that I probably wouldn't dare go into it because you have to know the different knots, the different wool, the different pigments. It's really difficult. On the same square is the Ali Kapu Palace that used to be the entrance to a whole compound that was behind. It was the residence of the Shah. And it's absolutely beautiful because, again, because it's Persia, you have decoration of animals and even some woman. There is a whole place with a woman that is decorated. But here's the view. You have the view of the dome of the mosque behind that was at that time rebuilt. But the beautiful ceiling of that open terrace. And then one of the rooms there, and I brought it in, is the music room. And look at all these cutouts in the ceiling that are almost in the shape of musical instruments and bring an acoustic that is completely different. Across from Ali Kapu is what used to be called the Mosque of the Women Mosque, that is now the Sheikh Loftola Mosque. It's a smaller mosque, but you'll see in a minute, it's beautiful. And this brings me to the point that nowadays Iran is mostly Shiite. It started until the 17th century as a Sunni, great majority of Sunni Muslim. Difference between the two is the Sunni believe in choosing their leader, whereas the Shia believe that it has to be a descendant of Ali, who was the son-in-law of Muhammad. But in the 17th century, there was a reversal where a new power came about in Persia, and they proselytized to change completely the profile, if you want, of Islam there, and it became with great majority Shia there. And let's say in Iraq, it's about half-half between Shia and Sunni. But they fight between them. So they have different mosques. The mosques are different. They have their different saints, if you can say. So let's go on. Just that's the interior of before entering the mosque there. And then another place where I was, and it's absolutely extraordinary. That's the most beautiful caravanserai I think there is. It's not far from the river that crosses Isfahan. And it's so this is a caravanserai that has been turned into a luxury hotel. And it's absolutely incredible. You can look at Abbasi Hotel. It's on the net. You can see amazing pictures of the place. And I have an idea of also, there are different levels of rooms, of course. It used to look this way. So this gives you an idea. You have that big interior court, and people were there with their dromedaries or camels and all the animals and so on. And this is the way it looks now. And so at night, you see all the tables, people eat outside, and it's absolutely superb. Here, just to give you one of the high-end rooms. But it's superb. Unfortunately, when I was there in Isfahan, you have the river that is not very deep, but you have lots of old bridges that are beautiful. And unfortunately, now they mismanage the water. And people that used to be around Isfahan that had agricultural terrain and so on. It has dried up completely. And even in Isfahan, they had gardens, so and everything apparently is dying because they have no water. A quick view on Baghdad, because it was one of the main hubs of the Silk Road in the Middle East. This is view now with the Tiger River. And just to show you how it started as the round city of Baghdad that was built there with that particular shape, which was a typical shape in the Persia and around. They had that perfect circle. The circle is perfection. And so that was a way for them, and all the important buildings would be in that circle, and then the rest was built around. So that was built between 767 and 912. It was the most important urban node along the Silk Road. It was called at that time the City of Peace. And this is the old university in Baghdad. Now, moving on, I'm going to show you just some interesting place. So you have the Seleucia, was the town that was just across from what is now Baghdad, and it's completely destroyed. But that was the original place, and Baghdad was built across. The road goes to Duha Ahopos, as you can see from Baghdad. And Duha Ahopos was a fascinating place. It's built around along the Euphrates on a height, kind of a, but it was a very, oh, that's good, I brought it. So what is left there is actually more than is now, because ISIS occupied the site and destroyed completely what was left. The good thing is all the important frescoes and so on they discovered there were already moved into museums. What is fantastic in Duha Ahopos, it was a very, very international little city. And here I brought you a map that shows you had all series, you had, look, all the temples that existed in Duha Ahopos, including the temple to Zeus, to Artemis, to temple of Mithra. But it was also a synagogue. And it was a Domus Ecclesiae. Domus Ecclesiae being the original small church, Christian church, that was in private homes. Before they would build a church, they would transform a private home into a church. And so they had that with incredible frescoes. And the one at the synagogue, the frescoes are superb. They tell you the whole Old Testament. On the whole Torah is illustrated on the wall, because they were not always afraid of images. For a long time, the early synagogues were completely decorated. So fortunately, this was preserved, and because otherwise it would have been completely destroyed by ISIS. The town was remained until, I'm trying to see, yeah, it was captured by the Sasanian Empire after a siege in 256 of our era, and the population was deported and the city abandoned, and then was covered by sand and mud and disappeared, and then was rediscovered in the 19th century. Same thing with Palmyra. Absolutely stunning place. That was also one of the hubs for the Silk Road, and that was occupied by ISIS in 2005, I think, and they blew up the temples. But just a superb place otherwise. Now, a last word before we end, because Marco Polo, after all, went along the Silk Road. He was a Venetian merchant, as you know, explorer, writer, and traveled through Asia along the Silk Road between 1271 and 1295. He recorded his travels while he was imprisoned in Genoa because he had fought against Genoa. What is really interesting is he was born in Venice, learned the mercantile trade from his father and his uncle, who traveled through Asia and met Kublai Khan. In 1269, they returned to Venice to meet Marco for the first time. The three men embarked on an epic journey to Asia, exploring many places along the Silk Road, including Samarkand. And they reached Katai, which was the name for China at that time. They were received by the royal court of Kublai Khan, who was impressed by Marco's intelligence and humility. Here's the road that he went through. He was appointed to serve Kublai, a foreign emissary, and was sent on many diplomatic missions throughout the empire and Southeast Asia, visiting present-day Myanmar, India, Indonesia, Sri Lanka, and Vietnam. As part of his appointment, Marco also traveled extensively inside China, living in the emperor's land for 17 years. Around 1291, the Polos offered to accompany the Mongol princess Kokochin to Persia. They arrived there around 1293. And after leaving the princess, they went on to Constantinople and then Venice. But when they arrived in Venice, Venice was at war with Genoa. And Marco decided to fight for Venice, was made prisoner. And it's during the time he was in prison that he dictated his adventures to the cellmate. And he was released in 1299, became a wealthy merchant, married and had 3 children. He died in 1324 and is buried in San Lorenzo in Venice. So decline, as everything, things go into decline. Black Death is one of the causes of the decline. The Silk Road eventually declined due to factors such as the rise of sea trade, which offers cheaper and safer transportation, and political instability along certain roads. From 1453 onwards, the Ottoman Empire forces the European to seek alternatives because they really put some heavy taxes on whatever was entering Europe through Istanbul. Sorry, and this, what is interesting, this is the reason why we have the beginning of the age of discovery, because now they wanted to look for other routes, and so Portugal and Spain started looking for other routes, and so beginning of European colonialism and intensification of globalization. And here's a map showing the maritime route. You have an idea the complexity of these maritime routes. And of course, now going straight to these islands where they find spices and so on too, other things. And of course, as I said, this is what triggered the big explorations. And this actually, the Silk Road went on a little bit, but nothing compared to what was before. So you've been incredibly patient. I hope I haven't completely frightened you with the tons of information. But for next time, we'll have September 2nd. We start a new season with Caspar David Friedrich. And those of you that don't know him, which is most of you, don't be afraid. Come, you might find something quite interesting there. Just after I decided I was going to talk about him, the Met started a big exhibition, yes. First exhibition of Caspar David Friedrich in America. And he was a romantic painter, so that gives you an idea. So quite interesting, very different. He's even used, I saw publicity, I mean, it was the front page of an article, and it shows one of the most important painting by Caspar David Friedrich, and they had put an iPhone in his hand. So he's becoming beyond just painting. On the 9th of September, we start that new series with Perrin McEwan, and it will be Abstract Art 101, apparently a very interactive class. That's where he's going to try to tell us why we should really be interested by modern art. And then September 16, we have the first of the great collections with the St. Catherine Monastery in the Sinai, the place where you have the largest collection of icons, and particularly the place where you have a few icons that date back before the iconoclastic period in Byzantine world. So thank you so much. If you have questions. Let me just say goodbye to my people online. Bye-bye. I'm going to stop the recording if you have questions.
Yeah, good luck to get that done.